everyone, I'm here with a Witch's Bookshelf video. I'm going to be talking about mostly the Little Book of Stoicism, which I did finish this month. I'll be giving you a full review, and I'm also going to talk to you about a book I'm halfway through reading, as well as a book that's going to be on the Witchy Book Club that I have in my Patreon as well. But for the majority of this video, we're going to talk about Stoicism. So what is Stoicism? What do I think of this book? If you're interested, stay tuned. I will let you know. So what is Stoicism? So Stoicism is a philosophy. It comes from ancient Greece. It was popular in Hellenistic times and then into the Roman period as well. In fact, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers was a Roman emperor. Marcus Aurelius was Roman emperor in the 2nd century CE, so current era. And he was called the philosopher king, and he was also considered the last of the good kings of the Roman Empire. So he was very different than a lot of other Roman emperors. For example, his stepbrother, he was advised to kill when he became emperor. A lot of people would, when they became emperor, they would kill other family members they thought might contest for the throne. Instead, he made his stepbrother co-ruler. So you can see like a different approach there. He also wanted to forgive someone who was trying to take over. It was not an uncommon practice during the Roman Empire where if a general won a very large battle, they might declare themselves Caesar, and then it would cause a certain amount of chaos. And so there was a Roman general that did that. And instead of wanting to kill him, he wanted to forgive him for trying to take over. But instead, an assassin killed the man, and he was very upset that that happened because it robbed him of an opportunity to practice, justice. So very interesting, different approach. He was concerned about the welfare of ordinary citizens, even the treatment of slaves, things like that. So a little bit, ahead of his time. So Stoicism, is kind of misunderstood. Like when we say nowadays that someone's stoic, we mean that they don't have feelings, or they don't show any feelings, or they just, take bad things and don't do anything about it. And that's not what Stoicism is at all. So Stoicism is the idea that we are all connected and we all have a responsibility to each other. And we also have to focus on what we can control, not on what we can't control. And what we can control is our reaction to things. What we can control is our behaviors. And are we living a life of value and character in the world? And a lot of people recently have found Stoicism has become kind of a little bit popular because it really helps people in difficult times to get through those difficult times. And I found like in the past, it's helped me as well without even really knowing what it was called. So back when I was a teenager, I read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which were basically just his journaling thoughts. He would get up and he'd write his thoughts, and it's been passed down to us as the Meditations, which, if you're interested, you should read. It's very, it's filled with lots of just advice and sayings. He often repeats himself, but, it's basically about being a good person in the world. And I remember too that, I read it when I was 17. I was like, oh, this was interesting, but I didn't really, look any further into it. And then when I was older and going through a really difficult divorce, I remember seeing some of Marcus Aurelius's quotes and being reminded of the Meditations, and it really sort of helped me. And then as well with this year, and I know why a lot of people have kind of turned to Stoicism is because a lot of the things that it talks about does provide some comfort. And that's the thing in difficult times, we often need something that is more in depth and not fluff. I think when times are good, it's easy to listen to positive thinking and manifestation. And if I just wish good things, then they'll happen. But when things are hard, those things don't mean much. They kind of show themselves to be sort of the empty, meringue that they are. And I found that, a lot of this, sort of positive thinking mindset and manifestation mindset is very hollow because it's all about acquiring stuff or acquiring status. It's all about the, raising your followers on Instagram and all these things. And all of those things are good. We all like stuff. We like followers on Instagram, and there's nothing wrong with, like, generally speaking, thinking positive is helpful, but it's this idea that it's the be all and end all and that your thoughts make things happen, is shallow and also can be very harmful, especially in difficult times, because if you believe that your thoughts make things happen, then when something good happens, you say to yourself, oh, I made that happen. Good for me. I'm so great. But when something bad happens, even something completely outside of your control, then you blame yourself or you blame others when something bad happens to them. And as we all know, life sometimes is just shitty because it's just shitty. And I think we all, have experienced in varying degrees the dumpster fire that is 2020, with COVID and everything. It's nobody's fault that they got COVID from someone. COVID isn't anyone's fault. It's not anyone's fault if the company they work for went under because of COVID and they lost their job. But if you believe that your thoughts are the things that are creating it, well, how damaging is that and how dangerous that is? It also creates blame. But what Stoicism says is you do not affect the outcomes of things. And Stoicism also says you don't control everything. All you control is how you react to things. You can't control the weather. We can't control COVID. We could certainly take steps to avoid getting it, like staying home and wearing masks and, limiting our social contacts as much as possible. Obviously, do what you can. But at the end of the day, there's no one to blame if, someone accidentally, they went out and they got it somehow and then they accidentally passed it to you. Like nobody, unless you're an evil person who goes around deliberately spreading it, most people aren't deliberately going around making each other sick. Like that's just not the way things work. So that's why I think Stoicism becomes so popular again, because it's a reminder that, hey, some things are outside of our control. And how do I deal with that? How do I deal with uncertainty? How do I deal with a world in various degrees of chaos? And if your life has been overturned by what's happened, people have lost loved ones, people have lost jobs, people are struggling to pay rent and things. And what Stoicism says is all you can do is your best, and you cannot control the outcome of things. So it does encourage things like there's 4 classic, what they call classic virtues. That's 4. I was doing 3, but it's 4. We have justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. So justice is treating people fairly. It's being just even when others are unjust. It's being kind. It's taking care of the most vulnerable people. It's basic social justice. Wisdom is making a good decision based on the facts. In these days, it's following science. It is listening to the facts and not trying to twist the facts to our ideologies, and making the best decision we can with the information we have at the moment. And that may change. So being adaptable. Temperance, not going overboard with things. So, if you have a chocolate cake, having a piece is fine. It doesn't mean like saying, no, I can never have chocolate cake. But we don't sit down and eat the whole chocolate cake at once either. So it's about moderation in all things so that we are taking care of ourselves. And then, courage. Courage means having the courage to act even when it's difficult, doing the right thing even when it's hard, choosing what's right over what's easy, which goes back to justice. So it's the courage to not only know what's just, but to act that way as well. And so those are the 4 main virtues that it encourages in people. It also reminds people that you have obligations to others, that you're not in the world alone, that it isn't just about you, you have obligations to other people as well. It also talks about things like you control your thoughts to a certain degree, which does kind of go with, it's interesting, the positivity mindset talks about, controlling your thoughts. And there is some truth to that. Like, we're the ones who control the way we react to things, but it's also about acceptance as well. It says, Stoicism says we must accept the world as it is rather than trying to pretend it is the way we wish it is. And that doesn't mean acceptance is not acquiescence. Acquiescence is like, oh, well, there's horrible people in the world and I can't change it. And, no one else is wearing a mask, so I don't have to. That's acquiescence. Acceptance is, yes, there's horrible people in the world. Yes, there's people who are not doing what they're supposed to do. However, I'm going to do what I can, and I'm going to do what I can to make things better, and I'm going to make sure that I'm, doing what I can to protect myself and my neighbors and my friends. So it teaches that. It teaches this radical acceptance that you're going to always run into people who are unjust, and people who are, people who are selfish, and people who are unkind. But we have an obligation to continue to be that way. So that's a very quick little roundout of my understanding of Stoicism. This book I would recommend. First of all, it's organized very well. It goes into Stoicism, what it is, it explains it, and then the last half of the book has 55 practices that you can do to practice Stoicism. Because Stoicism it's called Stoicism because it's named after the Stoa, which was a painted porch in the marketplace. And so these philosophers would talk about their philosophy in the marketplace with regular people walking around and getting their ideas. It wasn't about going off somewhere and just talking on their own and just being by themselves. So it's meant to be used in everyday life, not to be just thought about and then put aside. So he goes really good through the first part. He goes through a little bit of the history and who some of the major philosophers are, where it came from. And then he talks about some of the basic tenets of it. And it has, he calls it the Stoic happiness triangle. Take responsibility, focus on what you can control, and live with arete. And arete is those 4 virtues. So focus on what you can control, take responsibility things, and live with arete. And the responsibility things, there's this difference between fault and responsibility. So for example, white supremacy and the whole white patriarchal system, for example, is not my fault. It's not my fault that people in the past did crappy things, or that we live in a world where it's organized that way. However, it is my responsibility, and I believe everyone's responsibility, to dismantle those systems. So fault and responsibility are different, and people mix them up all the time. They think, well, if it's not my fault, it's not my responsibility. But that's not the way it is. So he talks about that. He talks about some of the things like focusing on process rather than outcomes, which is where I think a lot of manifestation stuff goes wrong. It focuses on outcomes instead of the process. Because sometimes we do all the right things and we still don't get the end result. But if you've done all the right things, you've done your best, you can pat yourself on the back for that. It's like they compare it to being an archer. You can practice, you can have the right stance, you can, try to make sure you have a good bow and arrow and all this stuff. But once you let that arrow go, it's now out of your hands. And so Stoicism teaches you to let go of outcomes. And then he has some practices like, let's see here. There's an evening routine and a morning routine. It really encourages you to journal. Negative visualization, focusing on things, not focusing, but visualizing things that could go wrong so you know how to deal with them in the future. So overall, I would recommend this book. You know what? I think that the writing style sometimes can be a bit dry, just to warn you. But I will put a couple of videos below if you're interested in Stoicism that I think explain it really well. I would also, I haven't read any of his books, but I have been listening to the Daily Stoic podcast. And Ryan Holiday really explains it very, very well. So I would encourage that as well. But overall, this book is a quick read and it does explain it, I think, really well. The practices in here are good. It gets a bit dry at times. I would give this still, though, a 4 out of 5 overall. I know I spent most of this talking about what Stoicism is, but if you're interested, I do recommend this book. Other books I'm still reading Rob Halford's Confess, which I'm really loving. When it's done, I'll give you a full review. And then if you want to join the Witchy Book Club on my Patreon next month, we are going to be talking about sigil witchery. We're going to be going through this book, and the Witchy Book Club just, is part of the online coven. So if you want to join, you can hit me up down there on the Patreon. But let me know what you think of Stoicism. Have you read any books about it? Have you heard of it? What do you know about it? I'd love to have a conversation about it. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, peace and love and rock.